Right, turning now to an issue our next guest has been sounding the alarm on for years, the current crisis facing boys and men. Boys are less likely to graduate from high school and college than girls. 1 in 7 men report having no friends. And men account for 3 of every 4 deaths of despair in America. Best-selling author Scott Galloway says the lack of attention to these serious problems has created a vacuum filled by voices promoting misogyny and a toxic vision of masculinity. But Galloway insists there is hope, and his new book, entitled Notes on Being a Man, he offers practical and timely solutions on how to turn this crisis around. And Scott joins us now. He is a professor of marketing at the NYU Stern School of Business and co-host of the Raging Moderates podcast. And it's great to have you back on the show. So you have been talking about this for a year. What state are we in now in terms of where men and boys are at compared to women?
Well, thanks for having me, and it's nice to meet you all. Look, the numbers are stark. 4 times more likely to kill themselves, 3 times more likely to be homeless or addicted. You know, we have a homeless and an addiction problem, but what we really have is a male homeless and a male addiction problem. And they're 12 times more likely to be incarcerated. And I think the good news is the dialogue's become more productive. I think we recognize that our country and women aren't going to continue to flourish as long as our men are flailing. And by the way, women are ascending, and it's wonderful. We should do nothing to get in the way of that. Twice as likely to be elected to parliament somewhere around the world. More women are seeking tertiary education. But at the same time, in the next 5 years, we're probably going to have 2 women graduate from college for every man. Only 1 out of 3 men are in a relationship under the age of 30, 2 in 3 women. And you think, well, that's mathematically impossible. It's because women are dating older because they want more economically and emotionally viable men. And if a man hasn't been in a relationship or cohabitated with someone by the time he's 30, there's a 1 in 3 chance he's going to be a substance abuser. And if you look just on a very meta level, the most violent and unstable places in the world have one thing in common. They have a disproportionate number of young men without opportunity, and we're producing way too many of them.
Well, and Scott, we've been talking about political violence here an awful lot, and you look at this past summer, the assassination attempts on Donald Trump. You look at the murders of the Democrats that helped run Minnesota's state legislature. You look at Charlie Kirk and that tragedy, his tragic assassination. You look at the man who ran his pickup truck into a church with huge American flags on it and then started killing Mormons. Again, time and time again, so many of these killings and a lot of mass shootings are men, young men.
Joe, you're exactly right. Unfortunately, there's a lack of leadership here. We spend all of our calories trying to blame the other side. We're interpreting fonts on a shell as opposed to having a real argument. 98.4% of mass shooters are men. And what do all these men have in common that we were talking about? They're actually less politically engaged than the people sitting around this table. They're men who aren't connecting to church, they're not connecting to their parents, they're not connecting to school, they're not connecting to work. They go online where they're facing a godlike, indomitable enemy. And that is 40% of the S&P by market cap now is connected to 2 things: trying to enrage us or sequester us from the rest of our family. Stay on your phone. Don't have friends. Don't find relationships. Don't talk to your parents. And then they go down rabbit holes. They're much more prone to conspiracy theory. They're much more prone to misogyny. And what do you know? There's a gun available for them everywhere. So if we want to have a real conversation around reducing violence, stop the nonsense of trying to blame each other based on our political affiliation. Right. And provide young people with more opportunity, hold big tech accountable, and make it less easy for someone who's having a mental episode to find a weapon of war.
And Scott, you have blamed both sides. You know, as far as don't blame one side or the other, you have found fault with the left. And I'll tell you what, belatedly, a lot of Democratic politicians have found fault with the left, not focusing on the problems of young men enough. you can do two things at once. You can worry about the challenges young women are facing while not ignoring young men. And there is a belated understanding with some Democratic leaders on that front. And then, of course, the right, online right, that the extremists are pushing. Just the absolute most horrific treatment, especially of women.
Well, to your point, so the far right recognized the problem first. The problem is they conflate masculinity and the solution with coarseness and cruelty and taking us back to the 50s when non-whites and women had less opportunity. That's just not the answer. At the same time, the far left's answer is to say, well, you don't have problems, you are the problem, and that the answer is to act more like a woman. And quite frankly, that's just not helpful to a young man. So what we have is a situation where neither party is really addressing the issue. I went to the Democratic National Convention, and I saw a parade of special interest groups addressing the problems, the very real problems that special interest groups face, but there wasn't one single mention of the group that has fallen further, faster in the United States than any other group, and that is young men. If you go to the Democratic National Committee website, there's a section that says who we serve, and it lists 17 demographic groups, from seniors to the disabled to veterans to Asian Pacific Islanders. The only group it doesn't mention is young men. I counted it up, it's 74% of the population. When you say you're advocating for 74% of the population, you're not advocating for them, you're discriminating against the 26%. So let's have an honest conversation around who's really struggling in this nation and how we address the problem. And that's the good news. These are addressable, fixable problems with common sense solutions.
So, Scott, let's talk about that in small, personal ways. I have two sons. One is 14, the other will turn 11 later this week. We are very tough on them about phones. They're not on it much, despite pressure from their friends. My oldest is often the one kid at the table without the phone, but we all believe that it's good for him long term. Beyond something like that, what are some things that you would tell me, to tell parents of young men, teenagers, whatever, what should we be doing to set them up in a more healthy way?
So if you were to reverse engineer to the single point of failure when a boy comes off the tracks, it's when he loses a male role model through death, divorce, abandonment. What's interesting is that girls in single-parent homes, of which we have the most in the world, actually have the same outcomes, same rates of college attendance, same rates of self-harm. The moment a boy loses a male role model, at that moment he becomes more likely to be incarcerated than graduate from college. It ends up that if you look at the studies, while boys are physically stronger, they're mentally and emotionally much weaker. I'll give you a very sad and upsetting statistic. Two 15-year-olds, both sexually molested, a boy and a girl. Neither is less or more heinous than the other. The boy is 10 times more likely to kill himself later in life. So the first thing is, and it sounds like you've already done this, you've already checked this box, is that we have to get men involved in a young man's life. There's just certain things a young man can't listen to unless it's from a man. And even just saying that 5 years ago, that men need to be involved in a young man's life, was seen as triggering. I was raised by a single immigrant mother, lived and died a secretary, lied in my life. But she knew right away that we needed to get men involved. There's also social programs and educational programs. Let's start boys a year late in kindergarten. They're neurologically less mature, 18 months behind the prefrontal cortex of a man. More men in K through 12. Let's take away the tax status of universities with more than $1 billion endowment that aren't growing the freshman class faster than population because they've decided they're no longer public servants. They're hedge funds offering classes, more vocational programming. Tax policies that stop taking money from young people and putting it in my pocket. People my age are 72% wealthier than they were 40 years ago. Young people are 24% less wealthy. And let's have an honest conversation. When young people, and especially young men, aren't economically viable, they have trouble finding a mate. And the most rewarding things in life are relationships, and we're making it increasingly difficult for young people to find relationships. Mandatory national service. Let's give young people the opportunity to meet other great Americans and fall in love. The lowest levels of young adult teen depression in the world, in the West, are in Israel, despite all the existential threats. Why? Because they're all serving in the army or in some sort of social service, meeting people from different ethnic groups, different income classes, different sexual orientations, and serving in the agency of something bigger than themselves and finding mentors, friends, and mates. There are absolutely things we can do to fix this problem.
You know, Claire, let's talk about peer pressure and the environment that boys grow up in now compared to when you and I were younger. I can tell you, and I don't think it was just a Southern thing, if there was somebody that was rude to a young woman, friends would all turn on them and stare and go, "What are you doing? What are you doing? You don't treat a woman that way. You don't treat a girl that way." Like when we were in, middle school or high school, there was that peer pressure. And I can tell you from everything I'm hearing now, that's not happening in high school. That's not happening in college. There is a sharper edged misogyny that's just not getting called out by peers, let alone teachers.
Yeah, and online is, a big basket here in so many ways, the things Scott's talking about. It's not just the phones. It's also the social media sites that have a tendency to be just cruel in ways that, frankly, it's much harder to be when it's person to person. 12 of my 16 grandchildren are boys. I don't know why. God didn't want me to buy a lot of pink, but I've got young boys everywhere in my life. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Scott, I see that going back to the workplace, for example, I look at my formative years as an adult, and my workplace connections were huge in my development in terms of how I was going to live my life as an adult. Having that camaraderie, having that collegiality of people that had similar issues every day at the workplace. So once again, online. My college years, where I had to get along with folks that were from a much different background than I was. We were all together. We weren't online. I see my grandchildren, the boys, particularly finding that kind of connection through sports. Because they have a team thing and they're getting to know other boys and they're making friends there. What can be done about this online issue, both work, education, and for the young boys that aren't athletically talented, who frankly have so much? I have some grandsons that struggle for various reasons with their athletic ability, and they feel, I believe, like somehow they are less than the grandsons who are excelling in sports. How do we get at that at a younger age for these boys?
It's a thoughtful question. So a couple of things you mentioned, college and high school sports. Unfortunately, the participation in college and high school sports is directly correlated to your household income. 4/5 of people in the upper quintile of income-earning households go to college. It's only 1 in 5 in the lowest quintile. Sports has now become a function of how much money your parents have.
Right.
But the way I would use it, the term I would use is guardrails. Young men need guardrails. I look at my own life. I had to go into the office. Remote work is a disaster for young men. I needed to get a tie. I didn't have the discipline not to walk my dog and watch Netflix all day if someone had offered me remote work. I had a girlfriend. My girlfriend at one point, I'm not proud of this, but I want to be open and honest, I was smoking a lot of pot in my 20s. And my girlfriend basically said to me, "Stop smoking pot or I'm no longer going to be your girlfriend." That was very motivating to me. Men have fewer and fewer guardrails in terms of education, in terms of relationships, in terms of a male mentor. Young men need a certain check. They need relationships. And the moment a man goes online, because this is when a young man, I know he's come off the tracks. I mentor a lot of young men. When they start blaming immigrants for their economic problems, or they start blaming women for their relationship or their romantic problems. And online waiting for them is a series of algorithms that recognize when they are having misogynistic tendencies or they want to blame others. And it makes them feel better about themselves and makes them feel seen. Unfortunately, they have these frictionless relationships where godlike technologies try to convince them they can have a reasonable facsimile of life online. Why go through the pecking order of trying to find friends when you have Reddit and Discord? Why put on a tie and try and get your act together such that you can get a job when you can make money trading crypto or stocks on Coinbase or Robinhood? Why on earth would you go through the hassle, the expense, working out, having resilience, enduring rejection, following up, of trying to establish a romantic relationship when you have lifelike porn? No social media under the age of 18. No synthetic relationships for people under the age of 18. And if any of these companies are seen as putting out content that can be reverse engineered to increase in self-harm, especially prevalent amongst young girls. We hold them to the same standards we hold this network. Any algorithmically elevated content means you have decided, you have made a conscious decision to serve a 15-year-old girl images of nooses, pills, and razors when she starts talking about suicide. There is absolutely no reason we shouldn't hold these companies accountable. We thought in marketing through the last half of the century that it was sex that sells. These algorithms have found there's something that sells better than sex, and that is rage. We have the most powerful companies in the world with godlike technology trying to divide and polarize us. And young men who, quite frankly, have less developed brains are especially susceptible to this type of division and rage. We need to hold big tech accountable for the damage they are doing to our youth. It's as if, Claire, we are literally trying to plan our own extinction. We are evolving a new species of asocial and asexual males, and our country cannot survive unless we take charge of this and recognize our young men have value. They fight our wars, they build our buildings, they're procreators, they play a hugely important role. And because of the prosperity I've recognized, the unfair advantage that Joe and I recognize at our age, we are holding 19-year-old men accountable. I recognize unfair advantage. The question is, do we want to hold a 19-year-old male responsible and guilty for the unfair advantage I received?
Yeah.
Wow.
Joe and Mika, we could talk about this forever. But what Scott is saying that I hear so clearly is that we are in an emergency situation in which we need to triage the American response to this crisis in masculinity. And the thing that I keep on hearing, both explicitly and implicitly, is the people who understand this the best are operating the most effective and richest and most powerful tech companies in America. It's Scott Galloway and big tech that sees this very clearly. And the question then becomes, how do you hold big tech accountable in this era in which they are seemingly untrammeled by the government that currently rules over us?
They live by their own rules. We always talk about Section 230. They're able to do things that no network's able to do, no newspaper's able to do, nobody's able to do. And Congress and the White House will do absolutely nothing about it. And of course, I've seen one documentary after another. Mika's seen one documentary after another. We've read one book after another, Scott, where these gods of Silicon Valley, these monopolists, they want other kids to see it, but they don't let their own kids see it because they understand how destructive it is, right?
Look, the number of high schoolers that spend time with their classmates has been cut in half. So to your point, you're absolutely right. We're up against an indomitable foe. Basically, essentially, our economy now is a giant bet on AI and big tech. And their big bet is they can keep you on your phone sequestered from your key relationships. But these are absolutely things we can solve. And just to call out, Joe and I, we have a debt.
Yeah.
We recognize a disproportionate amount of advantage. We have a debt. And that debt is paid back in one of two ways. On a very emotional, personal level, we have an obligation to get involved in young men's lives. The ultimate expression of masculinity is to get involved in the life and take an irrational interest in the well-being of a child that is not biologically yours. There are 3 times as many women applying to be big sisters in New York as there are men applying to be big brothers. If we want better men, we need to be better men. And the group that pisses me off the most are the most fortunate in the world, and that is tech bros, who are under the impression that it was all their character and their grit, and a lot of their success is not their fault. We have a debt to get back involved in young men's lives, both emotionally and socially and fiscally, and start restoring more economic opportunity to young men, programs that lift them up, vocational programming. One of the things I think would help young men the most is universal child care. 75% of women say economic viability is important in a mate, only 25% of women. Beyonce could work at McDonald's and marry Jay-Z. The opposite is not true. And we don't even like to talk about it, but it's true. And economic viability is not only a function of how much money you make, but your ability to afford to form a household. And let's give a shout out to young conservative men who say their number one ambition is to have a family and young kids. How do we help them do that? Through universal child care, which puts less financial strain on the home, and you can have 2-income homes. Financial stress is the number one reason for relationships fraying and breaking up. And the most susceptible a young man is to is to suicide, is in the 1 year after he loses his primary relationship. He splits up from his wife and he loses his relationship with his kids. Joe, you and I and every other man my age that is recognized as kind of prosperity, we have a debt. We need to get back involved in young men's lives, and we need to advocate for them.
Well, and Scott, you're so right. And that is the thing that drives me crazy about these billionaires, these tech bros who are running around saying, woe is me. Just look at you, say, oh, my God, everything is stacked against us. Oh, everybody. I understand every single day. I was at an event a couple of months ago where somebody said, are you scared? No, I'm not scared. I'm good. Are you worried about what's going on? Are you afraid this, that, or the other? I said, no, I'm not. And then I followed by saying, but then again, I'm a 6'4" white guy who was born in the middle class in middle America at the height of the American century, and I think anything's possible. Why would I be worried about anything right now? I have a responsibility, though, to make sure that other people feel that way, or other people get the opportunities that I got. There is no resentment. I mean, how can there be resentment from the tech bros? And you're exactly right. We have a responsibility. We were given advantages, even coming from a middle-class family where my father was laid off from Lockheed when he was 40 years old. We drove around the South for a couple of years. You know, he was looking for a job, but he got that job. We landed on our feet. We were just fine. And again, you're exactly right, because we grew up in a place where we knew tomorrow was always going to be better. Young men today, Scott, they're not feeling that way, are they?
Well, just to go on a more broader level, because this impacts women too, I got assisted lunch growing up. When my mom got laid off, we had unemployment. My mom was able to terminate a pregnancy when I was 17, and she was 47. Had she not had access to that, there's no way I could have gone to UCLA. UCLA, when I applied, had a 74% admissions rate. This year, it'll have 9%. I got Pell Grants. I went into the economy during the internet age, where middle-class households had sponsored this amazing technology because we had the money to do this, and we had progressive tax structure such that I could start internet businesses. We had rule of law such that I knew even as a small business, I had a shot. All of those things are under attack. The average 7-year-old is 72% wealthier than they were 40 years ago. The average 25-year-old is 24% less wealthy. Old people, quite frankly, have figured out a way to vote themselves more money. And the most obnoxious thing in the world is these tech bros who recognize if you go to the Canadian border, there's no more unicorns or multi-trillion-dollar companies. If you go to the Mexican border, there's no trillion-dollar companies, and yet want to shitpost America. Excuse me for saying that on Morning Joe. They don't move to protection. And that is the key. I talk about 3 stools of masculinity. First, you're going to be a provider. You need to be economically viable as a man. And sometimes that means getting out of the way of your partner and being more supportive when they're better at that money thing. You need an immediate move to protection. That's what it means to be a man, right? Men break up fights at bars, they don't start them. You hear somebody being critical of someone behind their back, you move to protection. You don't have to agree with the trans community, but if you see them being demonized, you immediately move to protection. And the most disappointing thing about the people who are supposed to be our masculine role models right now, whether it's our president or the wealthiest man in the world, is their default operating system isn't to move to protection. That's what men do. They protect. And then finally, and this is more controversial, procreation. I think we need to stop pathologizing a man's desire to have a relationship or, quite frankly, to have sex. Because that fire, that desire, if channeled correctly, can be very positive. a better dresser, be in shape, have a plan, demonstrate the ultimate secret weapon in mating, a kindness practice. All of these things can translate into making you a better man. Let's stop pathologizing men because they want to have relationships. But masculinity can serve as a great code. We just need to update it and make it more aspirational. What is not masculine? Being sued by 2 women concurrently for sole custody of your child because you have not seen your child. Taking away financial aid from HIV-positive mothers, stopping food payments. There could be nothing less masculine. Our job is to provide, our job is to protect, and our job is to make wonderful families through that desire to have procreation.
The new book, Notes on Being a Man, is out tomorrow. Professor of Marketing at the NYU Stern School of Business, Scott Galloway, thank you very much. Congratulations on the book, and we look forward to talking much more about this in the future.
Thanks,
Thank you, Scott.